Hey yo, what is up? Alex here, and we are live once again. And I hope everyone is doing extremely well indeed. And I'm super stoked to be live once again. We're going to talk about music and the creative process. And if you're tuning in live, let me know where you're tuning in from. Let me know what kind of music you make. And before we jump in, I'm just going to take a sip of this magical bean juice that brings you to alternate dimensions. That is great stuff. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the what of what we talked about yesterday. Okay, so what of a creative system actually helps you finish more music, create higher quality tracks, as well as get that pro mix. And to quickly recap what we covered yesterday, we talked about some of the major problem areas that music producers face as I've been talking to them in the space, my students, my own personal experience in dealing with multiple different projects, bands, producers, YouTube channels, producing for all sorts of stuff. And the biggest areas that are problematic are finishing music. Okay, so getting the output higher, basically solving the problem of the hard drive graveyard of all these unfinished projects that no one wants to talk about. We talked about finishing higher quality music. So music that is impactful, that actually hits the listener and actually expresses what we feel resonates with us, right? Being satisfied with our creation, as well as getting that pro mix, getting that finalized production that pops through the speakers and stands shoulder to shoulder with anything you hear on Spotify or on the radio. And we talked about how all of those things are actually interconnected. They're all part of the same thing, part of your creative process. And we actually zeroed in on the power of a creative system to focus on the process that will naturally create those results instead of hyper-focusing on those results independently, okay? Because they're all interconnected. So today we're going to go deeper into the what. We're going to dive deeper into what a creative system does to actually finish more music, higher quality tracks, and that pro mix. And real quick, I want to recap what I talked about yesterday is that next week I am launching the streamlined version of my production system that I'm super stoked to share with you. I've been refining it over time with my students, with my friends that I've been talking to, and I'm super stoked. It's going to help you a ton get more music done and feel more connected to your process. That's a huge part of it, is just being satisfied with your relationship of your process and making music, being excited to jump in the studio. So real quick, if you don't know who I am, my name is Alex, or my full name is Alexandre Joyal, super French here in Canada. I've been producing music for a long time, for like 10 years. I went to school for audio engineering. I've been playing guitar and instruments for many years, 10 years as well. And I've worked with many other artists, bands, recorded them, mixed them. I've produced work for independent artists like vocalists and stuff like that, and YouTube channels. And I've been teaching music production online now for just over a year and a half, I believe. So over the years, I've learned a thing or two about the creative process. And the more I've been teaching and interacting with it, I've started to identify some of the key things that will help us make the music that we want to make. All right, so let's move into what is it of a creative system? What is the key points of an approach that actually influences the output of your music and making higher quality music? And if we think about great artists in time, okay, so think about the Beatles, think about Michael Jackson's Thriller, right? Quincy Jones, and like Rick Rubin and some of his projects like Red Hot Chili Peppers, Californication. And if you look into the history of all of these artists and all of these projects, there's one thing in common, is that they create quality through quantity. Okay, and this is a very counterintuitive thing. And I know it was very counterintuitive when I came across this idea as well, because before, when I would make a song or finish a track or try to finish a mix, I would be working on a single song and trying my hardest to perfect every detail of that song and listen to it over and over and make tiny tweaks to the snare drum, to the kick drum placement, to this like EQ, to this tiny transition, and hyper focus on one thing and trying to perfect this thing and make it amazing. And that approach works, but you're beating your head against the wall, right? You're really forcing something into place. You're trying to make this idea the best you can, and you're focusing all your effort into this one thing. And the problem with that is that we end up zeroing in on insignificant details, and we can end up polishing turds, which is never a great idea. So on the flip side of that, if you approach through quantity instead of hyper focusing on quality, what happens is you curate quality through quantity. So like the Beatles, right? Or Thriller. In these examples, the artists write significantly more music than they release. Like I think for Michael Jackson's Thriller, they handpicked the 10 or 11 best songs out of over 200 song ideas. Okay. Same with Rick Rubin, I believe with Red Hot Chili Peppers and many of the artists he works with, is that he's like, if you want to release a record of 10 songs, you want to write 2.5 as many songs as you plan on releasing. So if you're going to release 10 songs in an album or 10 singles, whatever you want to do, write 25 songs, right? And this feels counterintuitive because a lot of people are like, oh, well, just focusing on quantity kind of misses the point. I want to have high quality music, but it's this counterintuitive truth of that focusing on the quantity is what will get you the highest quality in the end. Because what this allows you to do is come up with ideas, not hyper focus on it, and just see it to completion. Get it to a point where it's something as quickly as possible. And you're doing that with as many ideas as you can. And in that, you're going to be striking inspiration some days. Some days you're going to have different ideas. Some days you're going to have a whole different vibe going on and something. And the key is you're trying significantly more ideas. And then when you have a ton of ideas to choose from, a ton of ideas that you've created, then you can pick out the best ones in lieu of comparison. Okay, so you can compare, hey, whoa, these first 5 ideas are way better than everything else I've made, right? Or whatever it may be. And this is the key difference, is that you're curating quality through the quantity, okay? You're making more than you plan on releasing. And in doing this, you practice more, you're getting more different ideas, right? You're trying different perspectives, different approaches. And the key thing is you're avoiding insignificant details and you're avoiding polishing turds, okay? And that's the whole point of the process, because sometimes if we hyper focus on one thing and we're only focused on one song and we're trying to make it as perfect as possible, who knows, maybe if you focused on writing a different song altogether, that song would have just been better than the one you're trying to hyper produce and hyper focus and finalize. So it's something to think about. A few other things that systems specifically help you with in getting that high level quality, that high level output, the best mixes, that it keeps you consistent. Okay. So the best way to stay consistent is to not hyper focus on the results. We talked about this a little bit yesterday, and you want to hyper focus on the process. And the reason behind this is that if we hyper focus on the results, so you're judging your productivity, you're judging how well something went based upon the result of what the session yielded. So for example, if you hop into the studio, you got a couple hours, you're working on something, you hate it. Let's say it sucks and you really are not vibing with it. And then you say, oh, that 2 hours was a waste of time because look at the result. The result is crap. So you're making that connection, but that's the wrong type of association to make with creative work. What you want to measure is your consistency and your process. So how engaged did you feel in the process when you were making that track? If you felt great and it still sounded like crap, that's a great thing because your process is engaging you and the result is besides the point, because eventually a good result will happen, right? And you can't necessarily judge your process or judge your level of productivity based upon the result. Again, another example is, let's say you focus on if you like the result or not in your process and you love the result. Again, if you created something you love but you hated the process, that's some more information for you to process and change your approach. And the whole reason behind shifting this focus is that if you can use your consistency, right, your ability to show up and do the session, do some work, and feel engaged with the process, that is the measure that you can actually control, right? You can control how much you show up. You can make the tweaks to change how much you're engaged with what you're doing. However, you can't control the results. As much as you want to control making something amazing every time, that is just outside of our hands. Some days you're going to make something amazing with no effort. Some days it's going to take more effort and you're still going to make something amazing. And then other days you're just going to make stuff that is not great, that you don't love. And that's part of the process. And the whole key is that you're not using the result to dictate the effectiveness of your approach. Okay, because if you measure the result, you might be making really bad music but have a great process, right? And you've been showing up consistently and it's outside your control, right? So you never want to try and use something you can't control as a metric for your progress. And that's what a system actually allows you to do, is keep an objective metric that you can then measure and actually control. Okay. And then finally, the most important thing of any kind of system, especially with creative work, is it enables you to maintain objectivity. Okay, so if you have a process that has multiple different phases, it has different ways of approaching how you look at something, different mental filters to look at your song through in different points of time, and most importantly, allowing you to focus on different projects on different days will allow you to maintain objectivity on what you're working on, because the lack of objectivity is probably the biggest killer of any musical project ever. And objectivity is basically, if you're listening to your song 30 days in a row, over and over and over and over and over, you're not going to have a perspective of what is actually quality versus what is just familiarity of you hearing the same thing over and over. And you're not going to be making great decisions. You're going to start second guessing yourself. You're going to start overproducing ideas. You're going to maybe change things that don't have to be changed because of the nature of listening to something so often. And the point of a creative system is to help you maintain that objectivity by shifting your focus. So for example, if you're working on track 1, the next day work on track 2, and then the next day work on track 3. And then by the time you come back around to track 1 at a different phase in the process, you're going to be like, oh yeah, this thing, right? You're going to have that kind of new, fresh perspective on it to make more objective choices of what the song needs, instead of getting too lost in your head about it, because getting lost in our heads is probably the biggest thing that hinders our progress as music producers. Okay, so maintaining that objectivity is so crucial, and that's where a creative system comes in, is to help you have a system so that you remember what you're doing, what you're focused on at any point in time. So let's talk about, when I mention systems to people, especially artists and musicians, and I was kind of in this camp earlier. I was never like completely against systems, but I just thought that like I would just do whatever with my art and it would yield a result, right? However, when I mention systems to artists, musicians, music producers, a lot of people have resistance to that because they feel that systems are bad or that systematizing music is bad. And I agree with you that systematizing music is not a great idea, because there are systems that are very formulaic, okay, that are basically A plus B equals C. Like, put this kick drum pattern, put this exact compression ratio, do sidechain compression, use these types of chords. That's not the system I'm talking about. That is a formula, and that is, in my opinion, not art, okay? Because a true creative system doesn't give you the exact steps. It gives you the prompts and the framework for you to come up with those things, because that's part of the art. That's part of making music and producing music, is you making those decisions as to what sounds good together, what genres you want to do, what musical parts work together to give the expression and the result that you want. The system is meant for you, okay, for us as humans, right? Is to keep us in check, because the biggest thing that gets in the way of us finishing more music, getting higher quality tracks, getting that pro mix, is they all hinge on us taking consistent action, right? There's no magic pill that's going to allow you to write these amazing sounding tracks, these amazing mixes, without putting in the time, without getting that hands-on experience. And what's going to allow you to get that experience the quickest is having a consistent approach, having a consistency in your ability to show up with a system. So the system is not for your music. The system is for you to show up consistently and to not feel overwhelmed and to not get lost in rabbit holes. So I hope you can start to see how the system is not for the music, right? The music happens. Once you're in the zone, things start to happen. You start to